Welcome to the Joint Legislative Oversight and Sunset Committee meeting. My name is Senator Kyle Evans-Gay. I'm chair of the Joint Legislative Oversight and Sunset Committee this year. I would like to first start with introductions by the committee members, beginning with Vice Chair Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair. I am Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker. I represent the 3rd District. I am the Vice Chair of our illustrious committee. And the 3rd District encompasses the west side of Wilmington, which I like to say is indeed the best side.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Pettyjohn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Brian Pettyjohn, 19th District, Georgetown, Bridgeville, part of Seaford, part of Millsboro, Harbison, but I have given up hardscrabble to Senator Richardson.
Representative Johnson.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, I am Representative Kendra Johnson. I represent the 5th District, which is a little bit of a few things. Bear, Newcastle, as well as Newark. I am pleased to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Spiegelman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Jeff Spiegelman, 11th District, Southwestern Newcastle County, and Northwestern Kent.
Breaking barriers, as always, Representative Spiegelman. Senator Richardson.
I thank you, Senator Pettyjohn, for giving me hardscrabble back. I represent the 21st District from Seaford to Delmar and over to the east for Gumboro.
Thank you so much, Senator Richardson. Representative Griffith.
Good afternoon. I'm Krista Griffith. I represent the 12th District, which is the northern arc of Delaware. For geography trivia fans, it may be the only actual arc in a state boundary, which includes east, goes Fairfax east and North Wilmington all the way to Hockessin west, including about 90% of Greenville, 50% of Hockessin, and several neighborhoods in North Wilmington.
Where we overlap, which is wonderful. Thank you so much, Representative Griffith. Senator Pinckney.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name is Senator Marie Pinckney, representing the 13th District, also representing parts of Newark, Newcastle, and Bear. And although me and Representative Johnson do overlap in some parts, it is most certainly not all the same parts of Newark, Newcastle, and Bear.
Thank you so much, Senator. Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Stephanie Hansen. I'm the senator for the 10th District, which is parts of Middletown, Bear, Glasgow, and a little bit of Newark.
Thank you, Senator. And Representative Yerrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Lyndon Yerrick. I serve the 34th Representative District, which encompasses the parts of Camden, Wyoming, Woodside, and half of Magnolia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the committee. And for the benefit of our guests and the benefit of those watching at home, I should say, likely, I would like to have the staff introduce themselves as well. They are who makes all of this magic happen. So Mark, would you kick it off?
Sure. Thank you, Senator Gay. My name is Mark Brainerd Jr. I am one of the 2 Joint Legislative Oversight and Sunset analysts.
And I am Amanda McAtee, the other analyst for the committee.
Good afternoon. I'm Holly Vaughn Wagner. I'm the legislative attorney for the committee.
Good afternoon. I'm Natalie White. I am the administrative support staff for the committee.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elliot Gray, and I'm the legislative fellow for the committee.
Thank you so much. And so we'll move on and get started. But before we jump into the substantive pieces, I just want to give those, in our Zoom room and elsewhere, an idea of the process for today's meeting. So the first half of our meeting today is going to consist of a presentation from Delaware Interscholastic Athletic Association, DIAA. Will present their information, and then we as committee members are going to make comments and ask questions. And unlike yesterday, we are going to have time for public comment period, and you'll receive information about that as we go on. Following DIAA's presentation and the comment period, this committee is going to move on to recommendations for DNREC's conservation district operations. our staff is going to present the draft recommendations for the committee's discussion and possible adoption. So while there's going to be no formal presentation, we do have DNREC drainage program staff available today should any members of the committee have questions or need for clarification. And a reminder that there's going to be no public comment period for the DNREC agenda item, but members of the public are welcome to submit their written commentary via email. That's sunset@delaware.gov. Are there any questions from committee members before we begin? Okay, we'll start with the minutes. And if we could present the minutes, since it was just yesterday, if we could present them on screen for everyone to see. And if all the committee members should have received this via email as well. Once we get the minutes up for everyone to review.
Apologies. If you want to skip over the minutes, I have to get them onto the other computer. It was a quick turnaround, so apologies on that.
Not a problem. I'm happy. We'll circle back and do that a little bit later. Thank you so much. We are going to move to the DIA presentation. To present, I'm told today we have Donna Polk, the Executive Director, and Dr. Bradley Layfield, Chairman of the DIAA Board. I know that Mr. Rodriguez is here with us as well. Welcome to you and the rest of your team. Would you start with introductions and then move into the presentation, please?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Donna Polk. I'm the Executive Director for Delaware Interscholastic Athletic Association.
I'm Bradley Layfield. I'm principal of Sussex Central High School, and I serve on the DIAA Board of Directors as the chairman.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Rodriguez. I'm the Associate Secretary of Student Support, and DIAA falls under my purview as the department.
Welcome.
So do you want us to go ahead and get started?
Yes, please.
Okay, great.
Just hop right in. I'm so sorry. Yeah,
We thank you guys for allowing us to come today to present and share our story here about what we're doing here at DIAA. We plan to share how we function, our opportunities, our challenges that we have, and how we are a resource to our member schools and the Delaware community to provide interscholastic athletics. Go ahead, Stephanie, next slide. So as we start to function and do what we do here at DIAA, our purpose is to preserve and promote the educational significance of interscholastic athletics. We try to make sure that we're ensuring and we're remaining compatible with the mission of our member schools. We want to make sure that we're providing fair play. We're promoting good sportsmanship, and we promote and protect the health and safety of our student athlete. That is something that we definitely want to focus on to ensure the safety and that we're providing regulations for them to be safe. Next slide, Stephanie. DIA is a self-supporting unit of the department. We oversee our middle schools and our high schools in the state of Delaware. We are a member of the National Federation of State High School Association. That is the national resource for the high school associations that provides guidance for our interscholastic athletics throughout the states. Within that, we are a 100% state member school with the NFHS, and with that, we do receive benefits that allows us to provide resources for our officials, and that does come with a lot of the resources that they provide being a member. It is free to us, and that it's our PowerPoints for rules clinics, the testing platform that our officials have to take their tests, and as well as any resources for our state interpreters to be able to provide the rules education throughout the seasons that they are overseeing that sport. Also, the executive director, myself, I report to the associate secretary of student support, Mr. Rodriguez, and the board of directors. We work very closely with the department to ensure that our education-based athletics that we're offering, that we are following the procedures and policies, day-to-day operations that fall under the Department of Education. And the board, next slide, Stephanie. The board consists of 20 members. It's 19 voting members. We have one non-voting member. They consist of stakeholders throughout our association with superintendents, principals, our school board members, athletic directors, school administrators, public members. We do have a physician on our board, and our DOE rep in Mr. Rodriguez. The stakeholders that are on the board are subject matter experts, and they have an interest in athletics. Right now, we have 11 members, terms who expired in 2019 and 20. We do have one vacant spot, and the remaining 8 are current terms are current. And they will expire this year and between 2024. We're definitely thankful for the recent confirmations that we received with the 2 superintendent positions, and they actually started and attended a meeting last week with us. There is a possible consideration that we would ask is that maybe an additional superintendent position be added to the board. That would give all 3 counties then a representative. Right now, Sussex County does not have a superintendent representative. And as well, maybe a possible consideration for adding a head of school that would be able to represent our non-public schools. Next slide, Steph. DIA's authority allows the board to develop a lot of rules and regulations to ensure that we are providing the health and safety of our student athletes, that we're addressing regulations to make sure that they're safe. We also address eligibility requirements for our student athletes to compete. We develop policies for the athletic operations and sport oversight, establish membership and officials' fees, and establish committees and the charges for those committees. This authority gives the oversight over 117 of our public and private schools, 62 of which are high school and 55 are middle school. And that's nearly 29,000 student athletes that do participate annually in 12 different male sports, 11 female sports, and 3 unified recognized sports. So that is the offering that we are providing for our student athletes. And we also conduct 36 championships, and we crown 35 team champions and then 14 individual champions annually. To do all of this, our DIAA team of 3, we collaborate with our state interpreters to be able to provide the service for our member schools. We have 22 committees. And we also lean heavily on our athletic trainers and our school nurses, as well as our school administrators and athletic directors to carry out the purpose and the mission that we have here at DIAA. Our state interpreters, actually, we have 13 state interpreters, 1 for each sport, that are subject matter experts who do conduct our annual meetings. For our coaches and our officials. They provide rules interpretation throughout the season for our stakeholders. And they also attend the NFHS webinars to make sure that they are up to date with all the current rules and able to share those things with us. Without those state interpreters, our office would not be able to provide that resource and rules education to our member schools. Next, a key support for our office is our standing in our sport committees. Right now we have 22 active committees. The board did approve to create 2 additional committees. Actually, it's 3. 2 of those will be student athlete focused, and we're looking forward to being able to get those committees up and running. Right now, with our committees, we do have checks and balances in place for our committees, making sure that we're having representation from all of our geographical counties, and making sure that we have a mix of our athletic directors on there, as well as coaches, administrators. So we're making sure that we're trying to balance that out. I know this year, since I've been in the chair, I also wanted to make sure that our state interpreters, who are also officials, are added on those committees to be able to balance out so that we have someone to look to for rules education. Right now, our committees do consist of 15 people who are subject matter experts that we rely on. We do put out a committee call when there are vacancies. The chair of each sport committee will, or standing committee will make a recommendation to myself. We will review those applications and then forward them over to the board so that we can seek approval for that nomination. They do serve a 3-year term and are eligible for reappointment at the end of that term. So we do try to follow all of the Freedom of Information Act, the Administrative Procedures Act, and all of DOE's policies as it relates to committee work that is done within our association. And again, without these 255 volunteers that we have, we definitely would not be able to conduct our 36 championships. They are definitely essential and crucial to the work that we do here in the service that we provide our member schools, specifically our student athletes. The additional 5 committees that we have are rules and regulations, sportsmanship officials, unified sports, and sports medicine. And I spoke already on the number of schools that we had and the additional key components that we offer are compliance oversight. We focus on leadership development. We definitely serve as athletic directors. We actually support their leadership development. Right now, I think since 2014, we've had 33 of our athletic directors receive being certified athletic directors. So that is a great add for us as we continue to try and enhance the offerings within our association. Dr. Layfield, at this time, I will pass it over to you to talk about what DIA has done since our last review in 2008.
Thank you, Ms. Polk. Many of these recommendations were, for lack of a better term, relatively simple once implemented. The first one has asked us to have a licensed physician on the board. That term is indefinite. I can tell you that over the past 10 years, that has been invaluable with many of the strides that we've made to protect students from everything from heat acclimatization to incidents of sudden cardiac arrest, obviously concussion protocols, which are consistent and well-informed from our trainers to our coaches, our student athletes, parents, and officials. And particularly invaluable in the last 12 months as we've been dealing with the COVID pandemic and a safe return to play. So that board position, I think, was well needed and has proven to be a great recommendation. Second was the requirement of a majority of the entire board when it comes as it relates to financial matters and some other things where a simple majority of the quorum is not needed, in particular with budgets and things of that nature. And we have implemented those with the help of our Deputy Attorney General. We're given that guidance, so we continue to follow that regulation. Next slide, Stephanie, if you could. The next is, the work we've done to tighten rules and regulations concerning recruitment of student athletes. This has been a concern since my days as an athletic director, which was, prior to the 2008 sunset review process. We have ongoing regulation changes to 2.4 of Regulation 1008 and 1009 for transfers to schools. In particular, I can highlight just a few. We've tightened up the 8th grade eligibility rule. Some of our smaller schools in particular, where 8th graders are allowed to play up on JV or varsity teams, but we make sure that those 8th graders that are permitted to do so or in that school at 7th grade, so we don't have people trying to recruit to find a place where a superior young athlete may be able to get 5 years of eligibility. We've tightened the transfer rule to allow one free transfer in the 9th and 10th grades for some of our younger student athletes, and then tightening it up and make those transfers harder for our 11th and 12th graders, which typically are going to be your superior athletes to stop quote unquote free agency. So we have ongoing changes to 2.4 of those regulations, and also 10.0 in our regulations 108, 109 is for undue influence for student athletes, and we have tightened those up. I'll add even further in 106, which is kind of our guiding principles that give us our duties and authorities. Section 8 of 106 deals with the board's authority, and Section 4, I believe it is, don't quote me on that, I didn't write it down, is what the executive director can do when we get reports, whether it be to the board or to the executive director, of undue influence or recruiting and things of that nature, to expand our ability to investigate and then levy penalties should that prove to be the case. The academic standards, we focus primarily on, obviously, the educational balance of academics over athletics. This is education-based athletics, and the athletics do not come first. Those eligibility rules are reviewed annually with all of our member schools. And I'll also attest that many of our member schools actually set higher academic requirements than the minimum requirements that are mandated by DIAA regulations. There have been some legislative impacts. Many of these may have come from member schools or from the board, which were not within our statutory authority under Title 14, that required the General Assembly to act in order to change the statute so that we can, as a regulatory body, have regulations that mirror the needs that have been driven by many of these legislative acts. So as you see, our duties, powers, and authorities, I spoke to this earlier, have changed. They've increased, our investigatory abilities. Senate Bill 111, once again, as I said before, promoting health, safety, and welfare of students. You'll see a lot that dealt with concussion protocols, heat acclimatization, sudden cardiac arrest. I think you'll see that here in our next slide. Thank you, Stephanie. I believe that was known as the Gracie Firestone bill that went through, and you do see athletic trainers, school nurses, athletic directors, high school administrators, where there is a response team and a clearly aligned plan for all of our interscholastic athletics, not only to promote the health, safety, and welfare of our student athletes, but also of our fans, our officials, administrators, and all those attending our events. Same, again, with CPR and automatic external defibrillators, AEDs. The next couple that we have established, primarily, as I said before, we have tightened up many of our transfer rules that we used to deal with an inordinate amount of waivers for, that we were permitting one free transfer in the 9th or 10th grade from a student that wants to go, if they were at a school of choice, or back to their home school, or if they were at their home school and wished to choice to another school, whether it was public school. But what we found was, primarily in the Newcastle County areas, that many student athletes had been members of private schools their entire lives. And legislatively, there was no ability for us to grant a waiver on a transfer from a student moving from a school of choice to another school of choice. And we felt that it was an equity issue that we permitted that from, say, a vocational to a public school, or public to public, or chartered to public, or even private back to public, but it was prohibited from private to private. So this legislation was enacted so that we could treat a transfer in the 9th or 10th grade from a private to private school the same way we would as any of our other member schools. Next was our ability to establish fees. For many years, we had the authority to set fees for our tournaments with officials, but most of the games that take place, or the competitions that take place in the state of Delaware, are from member school to member school. All schools are members of DIAA, but it was not within our purview to say what a school was going to pay the officials. However, in order to have a cohesive system in place with the DIAA and our officials organizations, legislation was enacted so that we could then set those fees on behalf of our member schools. So in essence, it was no longer left up to the member schools to set the fees collectively with the officials organizations, and it streamlined the process. Finally, Senate Concurrent Resolution 79. This deals with mainly coaching student athletes out of season. The main impetus of this, for those committee members who may or may not be aware, is that we have had a long established rule in the DIAA in order to maintain fair play, that if a student athlete played for an interscholastic coach, that we wanted that student athlete to focus on one, the ability to be a multi-sport athlete. I think that's in the health, safety, and welfare of students. But we do know that sports specialization is something that occurs, and there are far more private clubs and leagues and travel ball and things of that nature that go on. And we're competing for the same number of student athletes who want to participate, but also the same number of coaches. And our system said that a interscholastic coach could not coach a student that's on their interscholastic team out of season at any time. So many of your travel leagues and your private clubs have student athletes that participate in interscholastic athletics, and also have coaches that coach the same sport in interscholastic athletics and on club teams. And our rule, which is meant to only focus on regulating interscholastic athletics, has been putting a hindrance on club teams' ability to have student athletes and coaches and have them basically separated on the different teams far outside of what goes on interscholastically. We have made strides in this area. There is still work to do. I think to bring forth what was tasked of the DIAA with the concurrent resolution 79. We have opened up our coaching out of season in the summertime, and we have not shown that to be of ill effect for our student athletes. The emergency regulation 1010 for COVID-19 during this time, and now our permanent regulation 1011, did allow for coaching out of season, primarily in the fall, because originally we were not intending on playing fall sports at that time. And to the best of my knowledge, we have not had any complaints of any illegal recruiting or things that have come of that nature. I'll say lastly that the Rules and Regulations Committee did make a recommendation in their meeting in January and presented to the board language in 7.6 of Regulation 108 and 109 that basically said that a interscholastic coach would be allowed to coach their students out of season as long as they are not acting as a representative of a school-sponsored activity, which I think is a big step in getting at the heart of what was asked of us in Senate Concurrent Resolution 79. So I'll give you a quick example. If I happen to be the Sussex Central softball coach, I'm obviously focused on the Sussex Central softball team during the spring. But over the summer, if I'm part of a travel softball league and I happen to have one or two student athletes on my private softball team, I would no longer be prohibited from coaching them because I'm not doing that as a representative of the school. Under our current regulations, if I was at that private travel league coach, I would have to unfortunately tell the two softball players that play for Sussex Central, go find another team. And I really do think that that was at the heart of what was asked of us in Senate Concurrent Resolution 79. The work we still have to do before that is how we provide equity for our public schools to allow for some form of coaching out of season, as long as it is safe for our interscholastic students who may not have the means to be part of a private league or a club. And also to provide to them that ability to get better at their chosen sport within the interscholastic, high school environment. I'll turn things back over to Donna to look at our fiscal situation and further matters.
Thank you, Dr. Layfield. Just to provide a kind of snapshot of our fiscal picture, DIA over the last, since what, fiscal year 18 has sustained pretty well, collecting revenue. We've been able to have a startup cash balance of $900,000 in the fiscal year 2018, 2019, and 20. When we have been impacted heavily with the COVID-19 health pandemic, starting in the last spring and the end of the winter, we weren't able to finish our championships and lost at least $220,000 in revenue because of that. And then this year, with the goal of still being able to provide the service to our young people, we did offer sports. That was a heavy lift. We did work with our schools to be able to get that done. We worked with DPH to provide those mitigating strategies to get that done. But in the midst of that, we are, struggling a little bit, and it's been a challenge because of the revenue that we're not able to bring in. So our numbers this year are low. Right now, we've collected at least $90,000 thus far, and we're definitely well short of that roundabout $700,000 that normally does come in for revenues. So we definitely are challenged a little bit right now financially. We're hoping to get through the end of this fiscal year between $265,000 and $300,000, and it will be a challenge for us in fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. So I just wanted to kind of paint a picture and provide a little snapshot of where we are financially. As we continue on, some opportunities that DIA will have is we definitely have an opportunity right now in developing a strategic plan. Right now, we do not have a strategic plan, and that plan will allow us to work on areas and focus on student athlete development. It will allow us to address our structure. Within COVID-19, there were things that were revealed as it relates to how we function and operate that we do have to take a look at. And having the strategic plan, we'll be able to focus on some of those things. We want to work on our branding. We want to work on marketing, a marketing strategy to ensure that we are branding ourselves and that the community understands what DIA stands for and what we're doing. We want to be able to address within that strategic plan other ways to be able to bring in revenues to assist with academic and leadership development programming and education for our coaches and continue to provide the education for our athletic directors. Another opportunity, and I just spoke about that, is the ability to have collect non-revenue for tournaments. So right now, the revenue that we are able to collect is with the tournaments. So being able to add that language in our statute to be able to collect non-tournament revenue would definitely be a plus for us. We would be able to build and seek sponsors or revenue to assist with academic programming, our scholarships that we offer. So those are some of the things that we're wanting to do, and the ability to be able to collect that non-tournament revenue would definitely be a bonus and enhancement for our program. One of the other opportunities that we will have is, addressing our equity. COVID revealed other issues that came up. One of those was a scheduling issue, and right now we're looking at how we can possibly try and address that. Currently, right now, the board will listen to a proposal actually tomorrow regarding football alignment. So those are things that we'll be able to address some of those equity issues that we're speaking of. And we are definitely keeping those in mind and being mindful of how we're making decisions to be able to address those things. Other opportunities is community involvement. We're trying to make sure that we're going to be able to enhance our partnership with different facilities to be able to conduct our championships, different partnerships as it relates to training for our student athletes, for workshops, dealing with mental health issues and things of that nature. Those are ways that we're wanting to be able to engage our community and our board of directors management and being able to look at how we're governing and structured, look at our committees to see the things that we need to do to enhance those things. Next slide, Steph. Dr. Layfield, do you want to piggyback on the challenges?
Certainly. One of the things that we found throughout the COVID-19 impact and even before is that we're one of few agencies that have to go through two separate boards for a level of oversight in order to change regulation. It lengthened the process. Obviously, we're going to follow the Administrative Procedures Act like everyone else will, but it is another layer which does not allow us to be nimble. And in 2020 and into 2021, the development of an emergency regulation that needed multiple modifications and then final adoption of a permanent regulation that now, if it needs to be changed, not only to go through the process of the APA, but to have it approved by our board and then ultimately the state board is a bit of a hindrance. With all due respect to the state board, I would like to say publicly that I thank them for their flexibility and ability to meet with us several times with the emergency regulation before we got to regulation 1011. But it did not allow us to be nimble to meet challenges, especially as we learn more about the virus from March all the way through. It seemed every week there was something new that we learned. Obviously, there have been several impacts with COVID-19, the ticket sales, and you saw the impact with the revenue on the bar graph before. There's been communications challenges, not only because everything seems to be virtually via Zoom, but the ability to meet in person with not only our member schools, primarily the contacts are with athletic directors, and sometimes there are communication gaps between heads of school, superintendents, athletic directors, DIAA. So not only the information that our office presents to our member schools, but gathering that information from the member schools, while also being cognizant that we need to hear from our officials, particularly with COVID-19 for safety concerns, and ultimately the families and the student athletes that we serve. I can tell you from the time I've served on the board starting in 2013, I've heard from more parents that have been very actively involved in trying to advocate for sports in the last 11 months than I had combined in the previous 7 years I had been on the board. So communication challenges still linger, but we are putting processes in place, hopefully to streamline those. Out of state scheduling, we did change a regulation where we now follow the NFHS calendar, but it has been a big change this year and a challenge as things fluctuated with positivity rates, not only with Delaware being so small, particularly upstate Delaware, where it's not uncommon for schools to schedule games in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. So that has definitely been a challenge that brought up some equity issues for us to be able to take care of our own, so to speak, both public and private, all those member schools that we represent and are part of the DIAA family. And then reductions in games played. So those have all been challenges that COVID-19 has impacted us. I will say that as far as successes go, I consider it one of the big successes of my time on the board, and I know the rest of the board members will say that we have had a safe return to play plan, and we were able to get through our fall season and championships, moving through our winter season, which is coming to a conclusion here in the next week or so, and then begin that championship season, and then hopefully be able to preserve the entirety of the spring season, which unfortunately was canceled in total last spring. Moving on, as Donna Polk said earlier, the ability to raise funds through non-tournament revenue. As she said in the beginning, even though DIAA is part of the Department of Education, we're totally self-funded through our tournament fees, not tournament fees, but tournament ticket sales. And if we have the ability to potentially expand sponsorships and find other funding sources not from tournaments, it will help us self-sustain. Obviously, there are rising costs everywhere. Championship ticket prices have remained basically the same for over a decade. It was hard for the DIAA to make decisions at a board level to raise our ticket prices, despite the fact they had not been raised for years, when we were carrying a $850,000 to close to $1 million cash reserve year in and year out. Thankfully, due to the responsibility, the fiscal responsibility of the board and our executive directors, present and past, we were able to maintain that when a rainy day came, and it's obviously been raining pretty hard since March. But this is something we are going to definitely have to take a look at. As Donna also said earlier, we've got with this, the DIA runs the entire state athletics apparatus with an executive director, a coordinator, and an administrative assistant. If it wasn't for the volunteers we had, it simply wouldn't be able to happen. So we need to look to explore ways we can potentially expand the staff size while also being prudent from a fiscal standpoint. Looking for more efficiency and workflow processes, how we get information out and materials out to member schools or receive them, whether it comes to eligibility reports, fees, and things of that nature, but we need to look to increase that efficiency. And many other states have facilities that actually are paying their state associations to say, hey, come use our stadium, come use our facility. It'll be a highlight for us. Delaware is a very small state that, one, we don't have many facilities. And particularly we look to the University of Delaware or Del State. They have worked with us under the new leadership of the athletic director, which has been different than it was, say, 7 to 10 years ago. But facilities are a continual issue, primarily in a year like this, with looking for pools where we can have swim meets. And there's no indoor track facility in the state of Delaware for us to hold a state track meet. We typically go to Landover, Maryland for that. And most all of the regular season indoor track meets in the winter are played outside of the state of Delaware. And then, as I mentioned earlier, with House concurrent resolution, or House and Senate concurrent resolution 79, there has been an expansion of non-school based teams, and not seeing that as necessarily an opposing force, saying, we're just focused on athletics, which is all that is within our purview as a regulatory body for our member schools. But how can we work symbiotically with those non-school based teams? Because whether student athletes or their parents choose to specialize in a sport or be a multi-sport athlete or both, we need to look for ways that we can work together in a safe manner with many more non-school based teams than we had just a decade ago. Donna, I will kick it back to you for further considerations.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Layfield. And considerations that DIA is hoping that could be made is looking at the restructure for the process by which regulations are created and amended. As Dr. Layfield mentioned, the two-layer board approval does present a challenge, and we hope that that can be a consideration coming out of this sunset process. Also, the consideration of additional board members to ensure that we are addressing each one of our stakeholders would definitely be an added bonus to the board. And then adding a malfeasance provision in the statute and under the board responsibilities, and to make sure that we are addressing that and that we are all acting accordingly as we're going along providing the service for DIAA. Lastly, is be able to provide the authority to purchase insurance when we are hosting and conducting our tournaments at non-state venues. So those are the considerations that we would ask as we are doing this presentation. Next slide, Steph. And Dr. Layfield mentioned on some of our successes, but these are some of the successes. And again, the biggest one that we had, I think, recently is being able to start sports back up in the midst of the pandemic, continuing to actually be able to offer that as we continue to go into the winter, fall. Definitely our member schools work well to be able to conduct those things, and putting the mitigating strategies in place with the recommendation from our SMAC committee was definitely huge. In allowing our governor and DPH to be able to even trust us to be able to conduct our tournaments and to be able to even offer athletics right now. That was a big ask, and we definitely are proud of that. And that was one of our biggest successes this past year. But on the slide, you will see the things that we do offer with our student leadership programs, the scholarships that we do offer. Again, speaking about the health and safety, those are the things that we're going to continue to expand on to make sure our student athletes are safe. Next slide, Steph. And the benefits, right now the benefits, DIAA is a resource for our member schools. We want to be able to continue to provide the guidance again with the health and safety of our student athletes, continue to be the oversight for fair play, making sure that our member schools are adhering to the rules and regulation that are put in place. And like next slide, Steph, I think it's the next one after that. More importantly, I guess our student, back up a little bit, Steph, our student athlete learning outcomes, it's critical. I mean, I was a former athlete, and you know, the athletics allows you to learn a lot of life lessons, the opportunity for just participation, being able to get a scholarship to go on to the next level academically or athletically, develops critical thinking, gives you life skills. It definitely provides an avenue for good sportsmanship. So these are really the benefits that DIAA provides to our member schools and our community. And the last slide actually sums it all up. And this is the reason why we're doing what we're doing, is to be able to produce champions, not just athletically, but academically, and then champions of life. So this is the reason why we're here. And we want to continue to be able to provide that service and that would be a resource for our community and our stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Ms. Polk and Dr. Layfield. I appreciate your presentation. And we are going to move to questions or comments from the committee. Please use the raise hand function. If you have any questions, the old-fashioned hand will do if the technology doesn't work. I will just note that while the pandemic has changed a lot about every aspect of our lives, you know, and we are virtually holding this hearing today, I hope that the committee will consider that there are, I think, good questions to be asked both about operations prior to the pandemic and about the challenges raised during the pandemic, keeping in mind the last review was in 2008. And so kind of our inquiry here can span, you know, what's happened since that time. And I appreciate that the presenters did provide context about the unique challenges that have arisen in the past year. And I'm hopeful that we can work together to find solutions for some of those. So I'm not seeing any hands at the moment, but yes, Representative Dorsey Walker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The raise hand function doesn't seem to be working. So thank you for the good old fashioned.
Absolutely.
Director Polk, just really quickly, you mentioned about equity as it pertains to football. And I think one of the issues that comes to mind for me is the situation with Howard High School and moving Howard High School from the division where they currently are to another division based on the number of championships that they've won versus the size of the high school. Can you talk a little bit about the rationale and what the process will be going forward as it pertains to equity?
Yes, currently right now, what Representative Dorsey is speaking of is the proposal that our Athletic Director Association has before the board, and the board will be hearing that tomorrow in our board meeting. And right now, a decision on where all of our member schools are going to land will be determined through the board. Based on the proposal, the board is going to hear that. They're looking at the enrollment, they're looking at the success over the last 3 to 5 years to be able to make that decision on how those schools will land within those specific districts. So the board is going to hear that proposal. They have taken in account all of the stakeholders' feedback from the superintendent's recommendations on down to listening to the coaches as well as head of schools as of today. So we're looking at trying to make the opportunity for fair play amongst our student athletes to be able to actually promote and hopefully enhance the opportunities that are there for our male football student athletes, so they can come out and want to play. So the real goal is to just provide comparable competitive environment for our students. And we'll learn what's going to happen with that tomorrow.
Thank you for that explanation, because Howard is, I'm not a graduate of Howard. Many of my family members are. I'm a St. E's girl, but, but nevertheless, Howard, my concern is that the school won't, and the enrollment won't get any larger. And I don't want them penalized because they're finding success in the athletic realm.
Yeah, they are actually a victim of their success right now. And we'll look to see how everything is going to play out tomorrow if there is a vote on that.
And I just would like to say I'm very pleased with the work that you're doing statewide and allowing athletics to go forth. Many of my constituents play sports, and to see I call them my babies, to see them involved and not hanging out, but to be, I know that the coaches are bringing them back and forth into the community, and it really does make a difference. So thank you for figuring out a way to protect our children.
Thank you.
And I benefited from that 8th grade situation at St. Elizabeth's. I ran track for varsity when I was in 8th grade.
Well, good. We're glad that it helped.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for a job well done.
Thank you.
That's a reminder never to challenge Representative Dorsey Walker to any races for all of her colleagues.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. I don't talk a lot of trash, but don't do that.
And Senator Pinckney was on mute, but I just, unless it was missed by anyone listening, proud Howard High School graduate, she showed a lot of enthusiasm there. So Representative Yerrick was the next in line.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question to Dr. Layfield. Could you just expand upon what else needs to be done in regard to the Senate Concurrent Resolution 79 in regard to that balance between high school athletics and travel teams, and what are the next steps? What do you see that we need to accomplish to tighten that up?
I'll say that I think that probably the largest driving factor that came out of the concurrent resolution can be solved as far as our interscholastic coaches that do coach, club teams, and also coaches that coach club teams that could potentially coach at the high school level, but don't want to give up the revenue because they're making good money coaching travel teams and club teams. So that was the biggest change from what we've done in the past, but probably the biggest hurdle, and the reason we haven't been able to accomplish it yet, obviously most of our focus has been on COVID in the last year, is that in order for us to allow interscholastic coaches the ability to coach their interscholastic students in their school capacity out of season, is one, working through the health and safety aspects. If a student is, let's say, a basketball player and a softball player, or I'll say track, since we've just heard a little bit about track. Let's say a student's a basketball player and an athlete that's a runner on the track team, that once they're in the spring for track and field, we want that to be their primary focus, and we don't want overuse issues. But we also would like the ability for, maybe the basketball coach sometime during the week or later on in the evening, if the gymnasium is free after track practice, to also be able to give some instruction to make that student athlete better at basketball. So there's the health and safety aspect of it, which we're going to need to lean heavily on our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, SMAC. And also there are several other regulations within 1008 and 1009 that need to change. We can't just wave a wand in one regulation and say, okay, well, we're no longer saying that a interscholastic coach cannot coach a student out of season. There's 5.0, which deals with open gyms. There's areas in 6.0, obviously 7.0 of regulations 1008 and 1009. These are three big sections of those regulations, and we need to strategically look through. We can't just say, okay, we're going to change 7.0, which is the coaching out of season regulation, because there are impacts where we would have conflict within the entirety of 1008 and 1009 or regulations that govern that. But we are making progress. Our chairman, Dr. Donovan, of Rules and Regulations, this is going to be item number one as we work through this spring to find what needs to be changed within the entirety of the regulation in order to move forward to bring that equity piece for, as like I said, for those students that may not have the means to be part of a travel team or a club team or things of that nature, but still want to get better. And the only resource they have is to lean on the school in which they attend and the coach they have that relationship with, at the interscholastic level. So we're working on it. Had it not been for COVID, I would guess that we would have had this wrapped up for now. I certainly hope that it will be wrapped up before the end of this calendar year, if not sooner, for us to have a recommendation from our Rules and Regs Committee to the board for us to move forward. All of this was based on an expansive survey, which we conducted after the concurrent resolution, where we got the feedback from athletic directors, from superintendents, heads of school, and also from parents and student athletes, many of which are interscholastic athletes, as well as club team or travel ball team athletes.
Thank you very much. And I would ask, because of the specificity of what you were referring, maybe you could provide that to the staff members, because I think that would be helpful in their review as well as helpful to the members of the committee and kind of looking at that code. If
I was going to say I can work with Ms. Polk, and we can look specifically at those subsections of Regulation 1008 and 1009. Particularly, it's section 5.0, 6.0, and 7.0, which is several pages of regulation.
And if the two legislators in queue would grant me this indulgence, I just want to follow up Representative Yerk's question, because is this something that you are pursuing outside of this review process? Or asked otherwise, do you need this committee to act on those pieces, or are you working currently with partners in the GA to ensure that those changes are made?
I believe that right now we have it's within our purview and authority to change the regulatory language without statutory change from the General Assembly. If we find a stumbling block, because we've looked at this very thoroughly, I also serve on the Rules and Regs Committee with Dr. Donovan, our chair, that I do not foresee right now a statutory change that is needed. It's just, it takes an awful lot of regulatory language change because it's not one particular section there. Should we come upon that, obviously we will reach out to not only members of this committee, but others in the legislature to open up opportunities in the best interest of student athletes.
Thank you for clarifying that's a regulatory change. I appreciate that. Next up was Senator Pinckney. I cannot hear you, Senator Pinckney. Perhaps.
Happens all the time. How about now?
There we go. There you are.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Representative Dorsey Walker. Thank you for your question regarding Howard High School. I understand that you graduated from St. Elizabeth's, but us Howard kids have a saying that we hold dear to, that you should have been a Wildcat. So I'm going to just put that out there, and then I'm going to move on. Dr. Layfield, Ms. Polk, thank you both for your presentation today. I am a freshman legislator, and I'm new to the Sunset Committee. So I have a few lines of questions that may be a bit novice, but just to help me understand processes a little bit more. Interesting tidbit is that I received a lot of community outreach regarding DIAA, and questions and concerns that the community had. So I want to make sure that I truly understand processes and how things work. So please excuse any questions that may seem naive. I just truly want to understand the process. Can you all speak a little bit more to, particularly I was interested in recommendation number 3, tightening rules and regs concerning student recruitment. And I was also particularly interested in school transfers. Can you talk a little bit more about what are the most common reasons that you see students requesting transfers, and speak to what that transfer process looks like for the students?
I can start, and then Ms. Polk, if there's anything that I've missed, feel free to chime in. The transfer rule has changed almost annually since before the last sunset review process. In particular, that it used to be the only way you would transfer is if there was a change of residence, custodial or relative caregiver change, obviously homeless situation falling under the McKinney-Vento Act. But obviously in a small state, and ever since the advent of school choice back in the mid to late 90s, we wanted to make sure that school choice was done for educational purposes and not for athletics. I can tell you one small change that we have made in our waiver process, where if there's not an automatic, where a student's automatically eligible, we've required that the sending and receiving school both sign off that it is not for athletic advantage, that there is a legitimate reason. So we have changed some of those regulations. One, to provide opportunities for students. Let's face it, in Delaware, we do have school choice. We do have obviously a large percentage of private schools and public schools of choice, charter schools and vocational, where students have the ability to explore different options. And students find out after a year, maybe at a technical school, that that's not for me. And, I want to go back to my traditional school, or I want to, see what this private school or charter school has to offer. So we've opened up to allow for automatic transfers if it's in your first or second year, to provide students who really want to move from school to school based on education, the balance of education over athletics, while also precluding that from happening in the junior and senior year, which, let's face it, typically that's where the majority of the high level interscholastic athletes are in their later years, prior to going to college, whether they play or not. So I think the change in the waiver process for the sending and receiving schools is a big one. I mentioned the 8th grade rule earlier. The choice to choice we spoke to, and then another item was if a student is at a school of choice, whether that's a private school, a charter, or vocational school, that they can transfer back to their home school at any time, as long as they're not playing for 2 different schools in one season. That was a regulation change where we realized relatively soon that there was a gap. We served to change that rule so we wouldn't have a kid that's playing at a vocational school in the beginning of the season, say on a football team, and then they go back to their school of residence, and then they can end up playing against the team that they were practicing and playing with in the beginning of the season. So that was a rule that was tightened up, but allowed for those students to come back to their home school, because we often see that sometimes that's due to financial hardship, particularly if you're going to a private school that's tuition payment. So I guess the long story short there is we are continually looking at 2.0, really it's 2.4 within our regulation on transfers, because that's an item that we've continually dealt with. And I think to get to the other part of your question, the primary reason we see a lot of this, for those areas that don't fall under an automatic exception, we see bullying issues. We see issues where there's fundamental differences of opinion with teachers and parents. Let's face it, I'm a school principal. Sometimes parents are upset with the decisions that teachers or principals make and say, hey, I'm done with that school and I don't want them there. And Delaware is a small state, but we have a lot of educational options. As long as we can go through a sound process with a hearing and say that we're confident that it's not done for athletic purposes, that there's a legitimate reason. If a hardship exists and we're following the spirit and the purpose of the rules, and it's not going to be a safety risk, those are what we consider granting a waiver where there's not an automatic exception to a transfer.
Thank you. I know you said that you were going to allow Ms. Polk to follow up. Did you have anything that you wanted to add? I can go on to my next question if not.
No, ma'am. He actually addressed everything.
Okay, sticking to the topic of waivers, I'm thinking of a particular community outreach that I received prior to Sunset Committee starting. I believe that the way that the process went is that the student received a waiver, and you both spoke a lot about equity, which I appreciate. If you know anything about me, you know that I'm almost always in every conversation talking about equity in some way, particularly for Black and Brown students. So one of the conversations that I wanted to have is I believe there was a instance or scenario where students were coming to you all for a waiver, particularly around the idea of mental health concerns for the student, and mental health concerns that they were having, and why they wanted the waiver to continue to play, but also honoring the fact that they were trying to transfer schools. My concern with that, as we have conversations of equity, is making sure that Black and Brown students have that same access, particularly because most Black and Brown students' mental health issues go unnoticed unless they're behavioral issues. Then we're quick to make sure that those diagnoses are applied. So as we're talking about allowing what mental health diagnoses such as depression, anxiety, as we're considering those things, we must recognize that those most often come from affluent students whose families have the background, health insurance, financial abilities, and connections to ensure that those documents are met to allow their students to receive said transfer waivers. I think that we must make sure that we're ensuring that we are granting those same accesses and opportunities to Black and Brown students who often don't have the same access to avenues to mental health professionals. And when they do, again, like I said, those are particularly looked at as conduct issues, which often then render them ineligible for many things. So I'd like us to ensure that we're considering that when we're granting waivers for students, and when we're looking at Black and Brown students and their desires to transfer for many of those same reasons as well. Another line of questioning that I had is regarding the sports committees. Would you all be able to talk to the standard practices that you have regarding sports committees changing tournament criteria, and what that procedure looks like for selecting and seating and participating teams, or allowing individuals without the approval of the board of directors? That was convoluted. I hope that question made sense.
Dr. Lewa, I don't know if you want me to speak to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Polk, and if there's anything else I can follow up to add.
Yeah, our committees are charged with from the board to be able to seed our tournaments, conduct our tournaments. There is a criteria set for that. This year was definitely an anomaly as it relates to the impacts of COVID. We did not know what it was going to look like, how it was going to end up, and you know, once we got down to the end, those concerns were addressed with the board. And the board did not want our student athletes, our member schools, to be impacted for things that was outside of their control. As that occurred, there were some decisions in the fall from now, lessons learned, and we're correcting those. But I don't think it was anything where we were just trying to change things on the fly or anything like that. You know, in dealing with the board, they did not want impacts to occur with our member schools. And we tried to do it as best we could with those committees in adhering to the criteria. But when it came to COVID, those impacts truly did really kind of made it difficult for our committees to make those decisions. And since then, we have put measures in place where we're doing more open tournaments to be able to address some of those issues and concerns as it relates to the impacts from COVID. Dr. Layfield, I don't know if it's anything else you want to share with that.
I think you summed up the highlights. Obviously, there were unintended consequences from the fall, obviously moving into the safe return to play, that, you know, the board did feel across the board that we did not want COVID cancellations negatively impacting students. But obviously, when you set original parameters for criteria for tournament seating and things of that nature, and then in trying to be nimble in what is meant to be in the best interest of students, obviously, whenever you have a tournament, certain folks are in and certain folks are out. And the folks that are in are very, very thankful for grace shown due to cancellations that were outside of the kids' control. And those teams that were left out, you know, have the concerns that, well, we originally had a plan that wasn't necessarily followed, and that, you know, anything that comes through the committees that is a change should ultimately go before the board. And it did not go that way in the fall, that the board said, let's show some grace and flexibility when it comes to COVID cancellations, which are outside of the control of the student athletes. But we learned from probably many of those constituents that reached out to you and several other legislators. And I think we've done a really good job moving forward into the winter to prevent any of those issues, that any changes that are recommended from a sports committee from what was originally rolled out would have to go through board approval. And as Ms. Polk said, with the more open tournaments and the elimination of minimum games played, I think you saw that at the collegiate level, even with Ohio State and things of that nature, that we are now more cognizant of things that we simply didn't know back in the fall. There were some mistakes made, but I will say that our board, along with our sports committees, Chairman Polk's leadership, working with our member schools, we've addressed those so they will not reoccur again. But this fall, there definitely were were issues that we all got a lot of phone calls on, and I understand it, and that our board and our office has learned from that.
Thank you both for addressing that. What I'm hearing is that mistakes were made and that's been acknowledged, and we're making sure that we're working on how we move forward with that for equity on all sides, which I appreciate, because you're absolutely right. I heard tremendously from community regarding this issue, so I appreciate this body being able to say that the steps that were taken may have not been the most appropriate steps, and that there is a plan and process for how we'll move forward in the future with that. So thank you for addressing those issues. Madam Chair, back to you.
Thank you, Senator. And just as a quick follow-up, I know in the presentation there was a mention of equity issues, and the reference was to scheduling. Was it this issue particularly, or was there another specific issue you were referencing on that slide?
There was and Ms. Polk can follow up. Once we transitioned originally back in July, the plan was with the COVID numbers that we would have condensed seasons starting with the winter season, move the fall sports season to basically the time of year that we're in now, and then start spring season later. And then when the Division of Public Health and the Governor's Office permitted a safe return to play for high-risk sports such as football, wrestling, and basketball, we felt that we could play the fall in the traditional fall season, and then the spring, winter, then the spring, but our fall and winter would have to be condensed. And that with fewer games played, the DIAA has no authority over schools setting their schedules. The conferences work independent of DIAA. Conferences are, they have their own bylaws for what the conference rules are, and primarily with scheduling, they have to fall under our regulations. But with a reduced game schedule, particularly in the game of football, where there were only 7 games played, the larger conferences in the school, which are the Henlopen and the Blue Hen, said that folks within each division of those conferences would play each other. The Henlopen conference allowed for a handful of games, I think 1 or 2 games, to be played outside of their division within the conference. The Blue Hen conference, a much larger conference, said they would just play within their division. And unfortunately, schools such as Slasianum, well, primarily Slasianum, which is a large school, a private school, not a member of a conference, was very much scrambling to find games. Where everyone else was having a full 7-game schedule, they only had 3 games, which were from the Henlopen Northern Division, the Henlopen Conference. The only thing within our purview was to take a vote to change the automatic berth into the football tournament, saying that the Henlopen North and Henlopen South and the Blue Hen Flight A and Blue Hen Flight B would have an automatic berth in the tournament. And that, unfortunately, that motion failed, which would have been the only incentive that kept the conferences from playing within one another. And fortunately, I will give hats off to the Blue Hen Conference to show a compromise and not say that they were going to play everyone within their division. So the Hodsons of the world and other schools were able to pick up Slasianum. Slasianum did find a couple of games out of PA, and they did compete with a full 7-game season. And I think that's also a big part. It's not the reason why we're looking at football realignment at this point in time, as we spoke to earlier with regards to Howard, because that work's been ongoing for well over a year. But it really highlighted it highlighted that equity issue, and not necessarily equity, but also parity. Who's competitive with who in the state, not only based on enrollment but success. So that's really what we were highlighting in speaking about equity in COVID-19, with fewer games and who was going to play who, and really what's within our purview and authority. It's DIAA. We can't tell a particular school who they're going to play. That's not within our authorities.
Thank you. I'm going to turn the floor over to Representative Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to lower my hand now so it's not over my face there. Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Layfield and Director Polk, I really appreciate your presentation. Related to COVID, can you describe or tell us if you track COVID cases amongst the individual sports? How are you tracking the COVID data, and what can you share with us regarding that?
Ms. Polk?
Yes, we do try to get the information from our member schools so that we can share that information with SMAC. We're just kind of collecting the positive case and how it's impacting the schools, if there are cancellations as a result of that. We can't really get a lot of information just because of the privacy of that. We do work with DPH to be able to let us know if there is any like team to team spread that we need to be worried about. But right now we are weekly, we try to get information from our member schools on who have cases and then how it's impacting them, whether or not they had to quarantine or not, just so we can be aware if there's any outbreak that we need to be aware of and the SMAC needs to make any recommendations. One of the things that we did do is try to discourage our schools from scheduling back to back, so the chance of spread wouldn't occur. But we are tracking that, and it's helpful for our SMAC committee to continue to look at ways to try and mitigate strategies.
And thank you. Which sport has seen the highest number of cases?
In the fall, trying to remember that data, it was, they kind of consistent across the board in the fall. Now we're getting, there's been some in basketball more. You would think it would be more in wrestling, but I think we would see more in basketball recently. So right now, I think more basketball is happening right now.
If I could add, Ms. Polk, we meet weekly with representatives from the Division of Public Health. We've been doing that since before the new year. A lot of the data that the member schools are getting and what's pushed out there is primarily about who is quarantined due to exposure versus who has been positive. And the great majority, from what we've learned so far in the fall and this part of the winter, most of our positive cases, there has been spread of positive cases from athlete to athlete on the same teams and even between teams, but very, very few. Most of our student athletes who have been positive, as the governor and Dr. Rattay say every week, it's what they're getting from home or what they're doing on the weekend, not part of interscholastic athletics. But the great majority of our games canceled and students who have been quarantined has been due to exposure and not necessarily as widespread with the positive cases going athlete to athlete. That has occurred, but the great majority of games canceled are due to exposures and not positive cases.
Okay, thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Representative. Dr. Layfield and Ms. Polk, I just had a couple of questions. Just a broad overview question. When you think about your clientele, for lack of a better word, you mentioned stakeholders in your presentation. Obviously, you interact with many different types of individuals and groups. I'm wondering, as you look to fulfill your mission, how are you thinking about your primary constituents and then your kind of largest stakeholder groups or partners, I should say?
I'll go ahead and start, and then I'll defer to Ms. Polk. Ultimately, the DIAA is here to serve our member schools, and the DIAA Board of Directors is made up of a diverse group of people who have knowledge of athletics. I serve in the role as one of the three school administrators from the three different counties. And ultimately, as a school, obviously, I know who I represent. I represent all the students and their families, the students and the families that walk through the halls, whether they're student athletes or whether they're not. So I think as an institution, as DIAA, we're here to serve our member schools, and the member schools ultimately serve the students and the families that attend. And that's not to say that DIAA should not take into account more broadly, student athletes and families. We're here to provide safe play, equitable play, and rules that everyone can, play fairly. So ultimately, we serve the schools, and in doing so, we serve ultimately the students. That's our number one job, and that our motto is education through athletics. Education comes first, and this body needs to be there to support our schools, and thusly, the schools are primarily responsible for upholding, our mission, and implementing our rules and implementing our mission as well. Ms. Polk, is there anything you'd like to elaborate or add to that?
Yeah, just to piggyback a little bit, with the stakeholders that Dr. Layfield hit on good points. One of the things that we are is a resource, and we want to be able to expand on that under my leadership. I want to be able to provide more education-based programs for our coaches to be able to enhance the play that in the product that we're putting out on the court and fields each and every day. So we're going to continue to try and be a resource, just providing as much information as we possibly can to our members, from the officials, just making sure that they're doing what they need to do to make sure that they're taking their job seriously, that they're making the right calls and they're educating themselves. So it's about educating, it's about being a resource and enhancing the offerings that we're having. Even though we're not necessarily at that level, we can provide the guidance, and that's the focus under my leadership, that I want to make sure that what we're doing.
Thank you for remembering the officials. They are a very important stakeholder group that we hope to grow in their ranks. We do have an official shortage, not just in Delaware, but nationwide. And we want to, as Donna said, educate and support them so we can grow their ranks, which is in the best interest of those student athletes.
And I appreciate you mentioned the officials as well. One of my law partners who has an office next door to me, I would get the update on the high school football every week, every Monday. He was officiating every weekend. So they are some of your most passionate stakeholders, I think. I'm mostly concerned though with parents. And so I'm wondering, I know, you talk about families and serving families, and I noticed obviously that you have a quota for members of the public as your membership. Are there any requirements that any of those folks or any of the other folks who may serve, in other categories are parents, either current or former, of student athletes?
That is not a statutory requirement that for the membership. I do believe that may be worth exploring. I will say that most of our board does have either current student athletes or former student athletes, if they're obviously, have grown children or things of that nature, but that may be worth exploring. I know Ms. Polk talked about the makeup of the board, and right now there's a requirement of only 2 superintendents, potentially having a 3rd, so each county is represented. And I may also, along with a private school head of school. I think that's very important, since DIA is unique. We're one of only a few states where we have public and private together under the same regulatory body. But I also think it may be wise that one of the 3 public school administrators be, no matter which county, one of those 3 public school administrators also be an administrator, a principal or assistant principal at a charter or vocational school, and not just a traditional public school. So I do think when you look at either the public members or any of those representing school districts, I think maybe being a parent of a student athlete would be a very important thing, and that may go through the vetting process as far as Senate confirmation, or it may be part of the statutory regulation in Title 14 of having that parent aspect.
Do you have parents on the board now?
Yes, our vice chair, Dr. Donovan, although he represents the Newcastle County principal, I know his daughter is a student athlete. There are others. I can't speak to the public members that we have at this point in time. One is vacant of those 5. If they have student athletes or former student athletes, I believe at least one of them does, just from the conversations that occur during meetings.
And this question is coming from the perspective of a former student on the school board, my first ever elected position. And I'm just wondering, the kids in these school districts are greatly affected by these policies, and I'm wondering what efforts are made to reach out to them, to educate them about what you do, and make sure that they understand that if they do have not necessarily complaint, but suggestions, or if they have an issue they need to address, that you're available for them.
Dr. Layfield, I'll answer that. One of the things that we did was we created the Student Athlete Development Committee, and then underneath that would be our Student Athlete Advisory Committee. We're going to be, now that we're, getting through spring sports, going to be trying to get those committees filled. And that's going to address that. That's going to be an avenue for our student athletes to have a voice and share their experience. And then from there, we can then continue to expand on the programming that we're providing, because we are serving mainly them. So that is an avenue that, under my leadership, that I want to make sure that we are becoming more student centered, and that we're addressing their needs and providing resources for them as well.
I'm happy to hear it. And then just my last question, at least for now, hopefully my last question would be, you had mentioned in your presentation regarding the need to be authorized to purchase insurance. What is the workaround that you're working with now in order to make sure that these events are safe?
Right now, we do work with our insurance contact here to make sure that what we're doing is within the guidelines that we're able to do. But I think having it clean and in the statute, under the things that we're able to do, would definitely make it a lot easier.
Okay, so it's not something that's not happening. It's something that you want to clear up so that there's no confusion moving forward. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much. Representative Johnson, I believe, was next.
Yes, excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question, Executive Director Polk, during your presentation, you mentioned that you guys need to develop a strategic plan. And my question is, for the strategic plan, is this a reevaluation of your strategic plan, or is this an initial strategic plan?
It would be an initial strategic plan.
And like ever?
Dr. Layfield, you can speak to that, but right now,
or under your leadership,
there's no strategic plan currently in place, and that is something I want to make sure that we do put in place so we can work towards the goals that we need to make sure that keep us on track and addressing the needs within the association.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I am pleased to hear that is on the horizon to occur. What I will say is that based on listening to your presentation today, that you are clearly on your way as you, outlined several aspects of a strategic plan when you talked about, the opportunities and the challenges and things like that. So that, even in knowing that this is going to be your initial strategic plan, knowing that you guys have in some ways already started the process because it is evident in your presentation. So thank you for that. Thank you for the response. I appreciate it. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I actually did want to follow up. I know you had mentioned in your presentation, I believe it was a team of 3. Is that correct, Ms. Polk?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And how is the, can you explain the other 2 positions that you have?
Yes, and so we have the executive director, myself, we have a coordinator of interscholastic athletics, and then we have a secretary.
Okay, and who sets the salary, benefits, et cetera, for those positions?
The Department of Education.
And I wanted to follow up too on the revenues. Obviously, you were citing a decline in the revenues, and it seemed that the explanation was primarily because of tournament revenue. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so not sure how to ask. I mean, is that a hit that that the organization's taking, or are there plans to find other revenue streams? I'm trying to understand whether part of the strategic plan is because of that revenue hit, or if you're working independently to think about how to sustain the organization through this time.
Yeah, it's actually twofold. Yes, it is to try and sustain the organization. I think the work that has done previously has allowed that cash balance to be there. Without that, we definitely would be in dire straits right now to even offer and conduct our championships. So we're going to continue to try and find other revenue streams to be able to bring in money outside of that, just ticket sales. So those are things that we're working on to try and do. But a lot of COVID really impacted how we need to function and operate.
And can you explain, and just briefly, what the operational impact, at least in the office aspect, has been? I mean, have you had to make cuts? Have you had to make changes in responsibilities as a result of decreased revenue over the pandemic?
Well, one of the ways that it was impacted is that I was hired in February. We delayed hiring the coordinator until June to get through the fiscal year to be able to save some funds, knowing that we were going to be impacted and not knowing how long COVID was going to really be around. I made the decision to delay that hiring of the coordinator from February to June, just to get us through the fiscal year. And we're just trying to be very cognizant on how we're spending what we're doing right now as we continue to go through COVID. It is a struggle. We're exploring different options on possible revenue streams and trying to see whatever we're able to do, working trying to seek sponsorships and things of that nature for our championships to be conducted. But right now it is a challenge.
I appreciate you explaining it. And if there are any updates throughout this process, please do make sure the staff knows, as you build, so that the recommendations can continue to be most applicable to the issues that we're facing.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Pinckney.
Madam Chair, I was reminded of another question that I had regarding insurance policies. Does DIAA have, and I'm sorry if we spoke to this a little bit, can you speak about DIAA's insurance policy and what access students have to that insurance policy? What does that process look like?
Currently, right now, we do not offer insurance for our student athletes. We actually do not have the authority to purchase insurance. So that is not within the purview of how we need to operate and function. Dr. Layfield, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to share with that.
Yes, that would be one of the things that you look at. Obviously, we're a body that represents member schools, and it would be under the auspices of the member school to offer medical insurance or catastrophic insurance for students, whether that's in it for a physical education class or for athletics. It may be an opportunity to look forward to if all member schools are part of DIAA, if we had the authority to purchase catastrophic medical insurance for the student athletes that are part of those member schools, rather than having that opportunity at the individual member school. That may be providing another benefit to membership of DIAA, but as Ms. Polk said, that's not right now within our statutory authority.
Okay, seeing no more hands at the moment, I'd like to move towards public comment. According to the rules of the committee, Rule 6 permits members of the General Assembly and other elected officials to provide comment prior to opening up to the general public comment. I'm aware that Senator Nicole Poore is available to provide public comment, and at the discretion of the chair has been granted 5 minutes to share her thoughts. So thank you so much, Senator Poore.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I will try to get this all out within 5 minutes. After chairing the Sunset Committee, I know firsthand the work that goes into performing legislative reviews on our state agencies, boards, and commissions. I want to thank the members of the Joint Legislative Oversight and Sunset Committee for their hard work and for allowing me to speak today. I stand here today with the goal of strengthening the DIAA so it can operate better for our student athletes. After numerous complaints and discussions, I would like to share and explain what I've observed. I also will share the history of resolution produced in 2018, waiver requests, standing committees, funding, And of course, I would never come to my colleagues without sharing thoughts for a resolution to these issues. Reflecting back to 2018, I introduced Senate Concurrent Resolution 79, directing Department of Ed and DIAA to promulgate regulations that permit coaches to coach student athletes out of season with restrictions that minimize the risk of unethical activity. This resolution passed with overwhelming support of my colleagues in the Senate and the House. A few years ago, DIAA conducted not one, but a total of 3 surveys on this topic. The first survey was completed by a focus group of athletic directors in 2015. In 2017, there was a survey of athletic directors on the same subject, but it was disregarded based on the previous executive director's feelings that there were not enough respondents. Yet the majority of respondents wanted the rules and regulations changed. A follow-up survey was distributed at the most inopportune time because, ask yourself, how many school members are checking their emails to fill out a survey during the holidays? DIAA distributed the second survey on December 18th, 2018, and it closed on January 8th, 2019. However, the survey had an impressive 60% response rate with a total of 949 responses. The majority of the respondents identified as coaches at the DIAA member schools, which was a 78.6% response. 9.1% identified as principal or headmasters, and the remaining respondents identified as an athletic director and coach or district level administrator. The survey results clearly indicated that there is a support for out-of-season coaching, changing the current coaching guidelines so that a coach could coach athletes on a non-school-based term or program outside of the designated sports season. To enlighten this committee further on the disorganization of DIAA, they met consistently since January 2019, where they set their goals to provide a regulation for out-of-season coaching. They committed to having this completed by June 1st of 2019. There have been several iterations of what transpired between the board and the Rules and Regulations Committee and other groups involved. Part of my written comments will be the documentation of a portion of meeting minutes that reflect conversations of an ad hoc committee that was tabled in July 2019. I bring all of this to your attention because this is clearly not a well-designed plan that support coaches, ADs, parents, more specifically, our students, and completely violates the resolution. What is most reflected is the lack of articulated meeting minutes and the neglect to comply with Senate Concurrent Resolution 79, because to date, out-of-season coaching still has not been created by the Rules and Regulations Committee, nor voted on by the board for implementation. Let's talk about waiver request. DIAA's 2020 annual report indicates that their board of directors heard all 37 requests for waivers for their regulations. It was reported that 22 of the 37 were temporary waivers granted by the executive director and approved by the board. It is noted in the regulations 1006 that in any event, all requests for a waiver of the rules with the documentation complete must be received by the executive director at least 21 calendar days before the next regular scheduled meeting of the DIAA board in order to be placed on the agenda for that meeting. However, there's a lack of transparency when it comes to a timeline around these waiver requests, specifically whether the waiver request must be placed on the agenda for the next regularly scheduled meeting in the conditions previously described. This is something that should be clearly outlined in the order to prevent postponements and increase productivity. The most recent incident took 7 months for a young student athlete to receive a waiver only after the father wrote to DIAA and the board members multiple times, but in combination with my several messages to the board members, the executive director, and the Secretary of Department of Ed. This amount of delay is unacceptable, and there should be an active communication every step of the way.
30 seconds, Senator.
All right, I will do my best, and if not, I will send the rest in writing. Currently, the public does not know who sits on each of these committees with the exception of the chair. The standing committee members selection process is not listed in the code and is unknown to the public. The appointment process of who has legal appointing authority is not clear. It would be beneficial if not only the members of each standing committee were listed, but also if the membership consisted of the same balance that DIAA Board has. This is an area of concern for all standing committees, but especially for the Rules and Regulations Committee. Currently, when my constituents come to me with a question or concern, and I go to look to see who's on these committees, I cannot find out who they are. Funding, I won't touch on it, but I'm confused about the loss of $186,000 with a fiscal year of 2019. My recommendations that I ask for this board to look for in this committee is the completion of regulations for out-of-season coaching should be a priority. DIAA and its member schools would greatly benefit for an overhaul and a revamp. According to the code, the executive director is an employee of Department of Ed. The executive director direct supports is to the Associate Secretary of Student Support, who is also an employed member of Department of Ed. This connection with DOE demonstrates a conflict rather than a benefit to the board and its functions. The ED should not report or be hired by Department of Ed. HR business is okay, but this practice is a conflict of interest. There must be more accountability than rather a dotted line to Department of Ed. Accountability and transparency, public access information is very limited. For example, the overall organization of DIAA website is lackluster at best. The average person should not have to dig through the Delaware Code and DIAA regulations in order to be aware of its rules and functions. More accountability, transparency would improve public engagement. And lastly, members of standing committees should be known to the public, and they should also have bylaws. Madam Chair, I appreciate that you gave me the opportunity to get all of that out as quickly as I possibly could. I will make sure that you have this in writing. You will have all the documentation to follow that supports not only the concurrent resolution, but also the outline of some of the standing issues.
Thank you so much. And I know your passion for this issue, and I know that, and I would welcome any member of the committee to speak to Senator Poore directly if they have questions as well. And we'll make sure all those written materials are provided. So thank you, Senator Poore, for coming today.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mark, I think that we are ready to move into the public comment period, unless you have in your queue any other members of the General Assembly or elected officials who would like to provide comment.
Not at this time, Senator. I think we can move on to public comment.
All right, thank you. So I will just clarify for those waiting to provide public comment that we will be conducting this under our Rule 6 for virtual hearings. So that means that 2 minutes for individuals and 3 minutes for those presenting on behalf of a group. And I would ask that the members of the public use the raise hand feature to indicate that they would like to provide public comment. And when your name is called, you'll have the ability to unmute yourself. There will be a timer available to you on the screen to show your remaining time. So take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Senator. First up, we have Trina Lasark. You should be able to unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today regarding DIAA. As mentioned, my name is Trina LeClaire, and I briefly will share with you a bit about myself. I'm a director of a sports youth organization that serves over 1,000 youth athletes yearly in 3 counties in Delaware and employs over 80 coaches, many which are employed by high schools and middle schools. I have a daughter that participated in athletes since she was 5 years old and was a DIAA athlete herself. I also manage a middle school program. Before I begin, I would like to share with you the extent of my experience with DIAA. Since August 2018, I have attended every single DIAA board meeting, which is 38 of them for almost 200 hours. In addition, I've attended 10 rules and reg meetings committees, along with several sports medicine advisory committees and a handful of sports committee meetings. I've also attended several Board of Education meetings with DIAA topics on the agenda. I provided public comment at probably about 90% of them. So I clearly have firsthand knowledge of the inner workings of DIAA. And in fact, I probably have a better attendance record than more than 50% and probably 75% of the board members. So my comments are not a result of 1 or 2 experiences, but for many interactions that should not be taken lightly. Enough about that. For the last 2.5 years, I have seen the success of DIAA athletics be largely driven by the passion of our state and athletic directors, coaches, along with our student athletes. They are the front line. They make the day-to-day athletics happen. Their passion in the last 5 months during COVID has shined through. Every student athlete and the parent of a student athlete is forever grateful for them. In contrast, the DIAA board itself and its process are hindered by red tape, inefficiencies, personal agendas, apathy, dominance by a few, and quite frankly, lack of leadership. The day-to-day things get done, but moving the organization forward on key topics and forward thinking never happens, and it just continues to be stagnant. Public comment is often dismissed and seen as a burden until just recently. I started attending meetings. Public comment was first heard at the beginning of a meeting and then at the end of the meeting. Now I commented in both sections. Then abruptly, public comment section was moved to the end of the meeting 3 months after I started to attend. What's the purpose of having a discussion, decisions, and votes at that point? It's already been done. I was shocked when
15 seconds, please.
So I have a ton of stuff to say, so I'm just gonna send it in. I can't even tell you how disappointed I am. These last 2.5 years, I have seen a board that doesn't move things forward, that multiple people make decisions, and public members do not comment. It's just, I would just encourage, I wish someone would reach out to me and also reach out to the athletic directors who feel lack of support, lack of leadership, parents. I think someone hit on the fact that there was no, from the parents and your stakeholders.
Thank you, Ms. Leclerc. And for your reference, it is sunset@delaware.gov. You can also feel free to find myself and Representative Dorsey Walker. We're able to take any materials and written comment that you'd like to share. And of course, if there's a need for follow-up, just let us know. I appreciate you being here to share your comments. Thank you.
Senator, at this time, we have no more hands raised for public comment.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark, for working with that. At this point then, what we're going to do is thank the DIAA folks for joining us today. Thank you for your efforts through the process. Thanks to the staff, again, for making this possible, and to the public attendees. I know not everyone who's watching today spoke, but again, if you would like to provide some written comment, it's sunset@delaware.gov, where you can send any materials that you would like the committee to see. And thank you to my fellow committee members for your questions and attention throughout the presentation. And so with that, Dr. Layfield and Ms. Polk and Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for joining us. Happy to let you go, but the committee members are not so lucky. I'll keep them on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we are now going to move to the recommendations for DNREC's Conservation District operations. So we're going to work from that draft document that was sent via email, and I believe is going to be projected shortly by our staff. Well, I'll tell you what, actually, if I can throw a little wrench in it. Amanda, are you ready to do the minutes, or would you like to hold that until the very end? Amanda's on mute. I think she's saying it doesn't matter. If you have the minutes ready, I would love to put them up there. Make sure we don't forget that very important part of procedure.
That is exactly what I was saying. Thank you.
I can read lips apparently now.
These are also in your inbox if reading on the screen is too cumbersome, if you're using multiple screens or whatnot. They are in your inbox, having been sent within the last hour.
They should be on the screen now, if you can see them.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
I'm happy to entertain a motion regarding the minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes of the February 9th, 2021 sunset meeting.
And I'll second that.
Thank you. We have a motion by Representative Griffith, a second by Senator Pettyjohn. All those in favor, please signify by your silence. If you oppose, please unmute and say nay. Okay, hearing none, motion passes. Thank you very much, everyone, for keeping up with that. And so now we'll move on and project the draft recommendations for the Conservation District operations, if you wouldn't mind. All right, thank you.
Sure, no problem. Thank you very much. Due to time, I was going to give a brief overview, but I will just skip that and we can dive right into the draft recommendations. We do have members of DNREC's drainage program here today as panelists. So if committee members have any questions at any time, they are available to you. Recommendation 1 is our standard sunset recommendation that we start out with pretty much each time we do a recommendation meeting. Under Title 29, the committee must determine whether there is a genuine public need for an agency under review. To meet this requirement, the committee may select one of the following options. Option 1, the Conservation District Operations Program shall continue subject to any further recommendations that JLOSC adopts, or the Conservation District Operations Program is terminated and the committee will sponsor legislation to implement this recommendation. It should come as no surprise to you that the recommendation of staff is option 1.
Thank you. I was having trouble unmuting there. And just to piggyback on top of that, I would want to remind everyone that there is going to be no formal presentation today. And it will take a vote of 7 affirmative votes to adopt or approve one of these recommendations. We'll move to take the recommendations individually as a process today. And so I would be happy to entertain a motion regarding the initial recommendation.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we go with on recommendation 1, option 1.
Thank you. Is there a second to Senator Pettyjohn's motion to adopt option 1 for recommendation 1?
Second.
Thank you, Representative. All those in favor, please signify by your silence. And if you are opposed, please unmute and say nay. Are there any abstentions? Okay, the motion is adopted. Thank you very much. Mark, would you move on to recommendation number 2, please?
Absolutely. These, I should state up front, these draft recommendations have come from a number of different forums. The 2020 final report, all holdover updates that DNREC has so graciously provided to us in July of 2020, September of 2020, and December of 2020, as well as the questions and comments from Joint Sunset during the presentation meeting held in March of 2020 when the Conservation District Operations and the Drainage Program presented in front of the committee. So the recommendations I am going to read and present to you today are kind of a combination of all 3 of those forums. So recommendation number 2 reads, DNREC and the Division of Watershed Stewardship shall continue the effort to realign the drainage program to function as 2 units within the conservation programs section, one being the tax ditch program and the other being the public ditch program. DNREC and the Division of Watershed Stewardship has been implementing this kind of transition starting back in 2020 when the Sunset Review started.
Thank you, Mark. I would entertain a motion regarding recommendation number 2.
I believe
Representative Spiegelman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question, if I may, on these recommendations. Mark, you mentioned that they are in the process. What is the timeline to complete that process? And of course, the answer to that question is going to be important for the final recommendation, which is to hold over with additional reporting guidelines.
Yes, I will defer to one of the members of DNREC who is here with us today. They have provided a lot of staffing updates that were included in the memo sent out on Friday, but I'm sure they have a much more detailed explanation for that. And I believe Secretary Sean Garvin has unmuted himself, so I will give him the floor.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the question. We are currently functioning as two separate units as described in here. So it's not ongoing. We are actually doing it currently.
That's easy then. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
In which case, Madam Chair, if there's no further questions, motion to accept recommendation number 2 is written.
Thank you, Representative Spiegelman, and thank you, Representative Dorsey Walker. There's been a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion regarding recommendation number 2? And you'll have to excuse me, it is hard to see everyone at the same time while we're sharing the screen here. So please feel free to scream out of turn if I do not recognize you and you need to be recognized. So hearing none though, all those in favor of the motion to adopt draft recommendation number 2, please signify by your silence. If you oppose, please unmute and say nay. Are there any abstentions? Okay, thank you. The motion passed. Draft recommendation 2 adopted. Would you move on to recommendation 3, please, Mark?
Absolutely. Recommendation 3 talks about the existing internal tax ditch working group. The existing internal working group shall engage the necessary external stakeholders to identify and find potential solutions to address the following issues affecting the tax ditch infrastructure: insufficient funding of maintenance, operational issues between tax ditch organizations, the counties, and DNREC's drainage program, changes in the environment, land use and development, and staffing and tax ditch officer retention and turnover.
Thank you. And I will remind the members that there were additional materials provided regarding the tax ditches, which are not the most intuitive vehicle. Although we do again have DNREC here to answer any questions should we need to address them in this forum. But I'd entertain a motion for recommendation number 3.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we accept recommendation number 3.
Second.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Next time I'll just shout as previously recommended.
That's okay. After the motion and the second, there is built-in time for discussion, so you haven't missed an opportunity to ask any questions.
Thank you. Again, this is better directed to Secretary Garvin. Again, my questions are going to be through these is just kind of a where you are with some of the stuff, especially with some of these issues that we've had with tax ditches, where we've got people who are negatively affected to a very large degree, but only paying a couple bucks a year, minimums, all sorts of stuff. So, I'm probably going to ask this question several times. I'm sure you're prepared for
it. Madam Chair, if you please, I'm Sean Garvin, Secretary of DNREC.
Absolutely, you recognize Mr. Garvin. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Yeah, this is a challenge that we have recognized for since I've become secretary. The department has recognized it, but I recognized it as soon as I became secretary that there are challenges with the tax ditches, and particularly as we look at the changing dynamic of where tax ditches started to where we are now, from large land holdings to individual property owners. And so this is an ongoing discussion, and the things that are outlined in this recommendation are, some of them are already being addressed, and others we can fold into those ongoing discussions with us, the districts and other stakeholders. But this is a big focus and a big issue that we know we're going to have to continue to tackle.
Any follow-ups, Representative Spiegelman?
At this time, thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion regarding draft recommendation number 3? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of the motion to adopt draft recommendation number 3, please signify by your silence. If you oppose, please unmute and say nay. Are there any abstentions? Okay, Motion passes and draft recommendation number 3 is adopted, and we can move on to recommendation 4, please. Mark, I believe you're on mute.
There we go. Recommendation 4 reads, the drainage program shall review the existing 234 tax ditch organizations and identify any that may be combined due to physical proximity or other factors. This was a concern brought up at the March 2020 presentation meeting. I believe Representative DNREC asked about if there is a way to combine existing tax ditches. So this would ask the drainage program to do that review about the ability to possibly do that.
Are there any questions for Secretary Garvin regarding recommendation number 4?
Hi, it's me again.
Thank you, Representative. Go for it.
Hi, Sean, it's me again. Go ahead.
I already took myself off mute as the question was being asked. So yes, we already have the authority under statute to do this. We're looking at larger tax ditch organizations and upstream and downstream small organizations that might be able to be folded in. I think it was approximately 2 years ago where we did a similar thing on Gum Branch, in which we were able to fold in smaller corporations into the larger Gum Branch. So it is something that we have been evaluating and we have done, and we're have the authority to do, and we'll continue to look at those.
Any other follow-ups, Representative? No, Representative Dorsey Walker.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary Garvin, for your attendance today. It just dawned on me, for those who are unfamiliar with what tax ditches are, and for some of our newer members, would you mind just giving a brief overview of tax ditches, please, Secretary Garvin?
Absolutely, and I will do everything in my being to try to make it as brief as possible. Tax ditches were established a long time ago, particularly predominantly as a vehicle in agriculture to help to get drainage away from ag fields so that they could stay in productive use. They are actual corporations set up in the state in which those that are in the organization and the corporation pay for the maintenance and upkeep of those tax ditches over the course of time, as I alluded to before, as they were mainly large in holdings. And so you would have one or two landholders who were really the lead on the tax ditch corporations. Over time, as land got developed, you started having smaller plots that became part of the tax ditch corporation, which has kind of led a little bit to the issues that we're discussing as it relates to tax ditches, which you don't have as many participants. They don't see necessarily the value in it. The organization itself is probably somebody who's been heading up the organization for 60 years, having problems collecting the fees for the tax ditch corporation. So part of the challenge is figure out how do we manage these important waterway conveyances. Highway drainage has been set up around them over the years. So there are public health and safety issues, as well as nuisance issues and also agricultural issues as it relates to these tax ditches. That's the really short and concise version, but we can go on if you'd like.
Thank you so much. That was mainly for the viewing audience as well as for some of our newer members. Appreciate you, Secretary.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. If there's no other questions for Secretary Garvin, I'd entertain a motion regarding draft recommendation number 4.
So moved. We adopt recommendation 4.
Second.
Thank you. Motion was made, Senator Pettyjohn, and I believe I heard Senator Hansen second it. If there's any additional discussion at this time. Okay, all those in favor, please signify by your silence. If you oppose, please unmute and say nay. All right, any abstentions? All right, thank you. That motion passes. We'll move on to draft recommendation number 5, please, Mark.
Thank you, Senator. This recommendation, particularly the option attached to it, is the brainchild of Representative Spiegelman. The drainage program shall engage the tax ditch working group in drafting an updated process to dissolve a tax ditch organization due to nonfeasance and other failures of statutory obligations. The option reads: the drainage program reports to the JLOSC on the organizational and financial need required for the tax ditch program to successfully take over and manage a failing tax ditch organization.
Representative Spiegelman, if there's any commentary you'd like to add regarding your thoughts here and that might benefit the rest of the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes. You know, for those of us, and it seems to be much more of a downstate thing, who have tax ditches that simply aren't doing what they need to do, partially because in some cases mismanagement, some cases a lot of times they're in over their heads. There needs to be some sort of process whereby the members of the general public have a capacity to either reorganize or disintegrate a tax ditch organization, but somebody's still got to manage the ditch in the water. Mr. Secretary, I'm interested in what you have to say about this one here, your report back to us. And also, I believe we had discussions at some point, I believe the Farm Bureau was involved, about better educating tax ditch managers who are in over their heads, or members of the public who don't know how to get involved, and that kind of idea, a certain outreach aspect. I'm not sure if that goes here, but I remember it was part of the discussion at some point, wow, a long time ago, before there was such a thing as COVID.
Is that a question to me? I just want to make sure I'm not speaking out of turn.
Somewhere in there was a question to you. I could frame it as a question if this
No,
is.
I think I understand. As long as the Madam Chair gives me the floor, I will certainly try to address your comment or question.
The floor is yours, Secretary Garvin. I did hear a question in there, so I do believe it's warranted.
Okay, well, hopefully what I say answers that question. So actually, Title 7, Chapter 41, there is a process for dissolution of tax ditches. This is kind of the biggest question that we're dealing with in the conversations that we have ongoing with the districts. And I know the Farm Bureau has been in and out of those conversations. The big question is, if you dissolve them, then what happens? And so that's what we're trying to tackle. We want them to be as solvent as possible. We want them to really, meet the intent of why they were established in the first place, was for local issues and local control and really local resourcing of these ditches, but recognizing there's a public interest in some of these tax ditch organizations are not really in the position or have been unable in the past years to do what's necessary. So we're trying to figure out what is the best way to both try to keep them solvent, try to put some of those together, but if they can and they can't function, what are the options moving forward? And obviously, it's anywhere between, the districts, the state, other organizations, and that's part of what we're engaged in active conversations of all the things that I think are listed in the recommendation. These challenges, this I think is number one. And so we have some work to do, but we do have the authority. The authority does exist. It requires landowners to vote, and a majority of them, and a lot of things that are even difficult to get done just because you don't have all of the members of the corporation as engaged as they should be. So this is the biggest one. When I give you the answer, we're continuing to work on it. This is the biggest challenge that we have.
Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your candor on that. Would it be at any real added burden if we added to the language here about your department, your division being able to recommend as part of this working group best practices? Because I think that was something that I remember in the presentation, that was something that was lacking too, because as you know much better than I do, the dizzying array of different ways tax ditches handle things, and tax ditch managers who are oftentimes not communicating with others Senator Pettijohn might have a really great solution to an issue in his district that they hadn't thought of, up in Blackburn, for example. So would you object strongly if we were to add to this option the idea of best practices in some fashion? I'm open to suggestion.
So I'm not sure that I either object or don't object. I don't know that strongly is necessary. But having said that, this has been an ongoing conversation. Our staff has already been working with, and we do have incredible staff who work with tax ditch corporations, and they are working with them, giving them best management practices and a number of other things. And so I don't know that it needs to be added. I think it's something that's ongoing already. I think the challenge is more related to just having the organization. As I said, there are some organizations where there's one person who's been doing it forever and doesn't necessarily need to know the best practices, just needs to kind of have more people supporting and more people providing resources. So I think we're already doing that. But I think it still goes back to the larger challenge I mentioned before.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Pettijohn, I believe you had your hand raised, but I wasn't sure if that had been retracted.
Yep. Representative Spiegelman really asked just about what I was going to ask. So.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Secretary, for the additional explanation, and happy to entertain a motion regarding draft recommendation 5 at this time.
Motion to adopt recommendation 5 is written.
Second.
All right, thank you. There is a motion and a second. I believe that was Senator Hansen and Senator Pettijohn. So we'll let the minute meeting drafters decide who the real seconder was. And I appreciate.
Sorry, point of clarification, Senator. Is this with the option or without?
I believe, I'm sorry, who was just speaking?
I'm sorry, it's Mark.
I'm sorry, Mark's right. Yes, I would, as written with the option.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for asking and clarifying. That's how I heard it, and I appreciate the clarification. So is there any additional discussion regarding draft recommendation 5?
Just for the record, I believe Representative Dorsey Walker beat me to the second on that.
Oh, that was okay. I'm so sorry. It's so hard to see everyone like this. We'll have to tell Zoom our problem. So thank you very much, Representative Dorsey Walker. I'll move to the vote. If you could, if you're in favor of the motion, please signify with your silence. If you object, please unmute and say nay. Okay, any abstentions? All right. Motion passes and draft recommendation 5 is adopted. We'll move on to number 6.
Recommendation 6 reads, the drainage programs shall establish a mechanism for developing scalable and manageable projects to expand the roles of the Kent and Sussex conservation districts. As Secretary Garvin will speak to, this is something that the drainage program is already doing. It's an ongoing process. And this was something that was very popular back in March 2020 with members of the committee. So I included it here just to have basically continued the committee's support of that kind of role for the Kent and Sussex conservation districts.
Thank you, Secretary Garvin. Any additional comments on recommendation 6?
Only that I think that this is what landed us here in front of your committee in the first place. And at the time, we had already been working with the districts. The desire and need for both Kent and Sussex district was to be able to focus on some more manageable projects that they could get done fairly quickly and have funding to do that. And so we've changed they hired some engineers. We changed the funding mechanisms and are getting them more funding so that they're able to do that. And I believe both last year's budget and this year's budget continues that commitment. So I think this was done a long time ago, but I think was what brought us to the table in the first place. So I'm supportive of the recommendation because we're already doing it.
Are there any other follow-up questions regarding draft recommendation 6 for Secretary Garvin? Okay, I'd happy to entertain a motion regarding the draft recommendation.
I
So
move
moved.
that yeah, that was definitely Senator Pettyjohn, so I'll second.
Thank you so much. And Senator Pennington, I think you did not hear me earlier. We do not try to race Representative Dorsey Walker. She will always win. So Senator Pettyjohn, thank you so much for the motion, seconded by Representative Dorsey Walker. Any other comment, or I'm sorry, any other discussion at this time? Okay, hearing none. If you are in favor of the motion, please signify with your silence. If you oppose, please unmute and say nay. Are there any abstentions? Okay, thank you. Draft recommendation 6 is adopted. We'll move on to draft recommendation 7, please, Mark.
Great, thank you. Recommendation 7 reads, the drainage program shall submit a status report no later than January 31st, 2022 to the JLOSC. Report shall include findings of the attached ditch working group, analysis of the proposal to combine any existing tax ditch organizations, status of process of dissolving tax ditch organizations, update on expanded partnerships between Kent and Sussex conservation districts, the latest RC&D project prioritization list, and the option relates back to the option in recommendation 5 about the management of failing tax ditches. Basically, this recommendation acts as a mechanism for you as the committee to get follow-up information from the drainage program.
And Mark, just a point of clarification, as the analyst, your recommendation is to include the option, is that correct?
Correct. Since recommendation 5 was adopted with the option, then it should be recommendation 7 be adopted with the option.
Thank you. Any questions for Secretary Garvin regarding recommendation 7, or considering this is the requested update? Any questions for our staff regarding recommendation 7 or the timeline or the contents of it? Okay, hearing none, I'd entertain a motion regarding draft recommendation 7.
Second.
Thank you, Representative Spiegelman and Representative Dorsey Walker. All those in favor of the motion to adopt draft recommendation 7, I believe with the option, is that correct, Representative Spiegelman?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Please signify with your silence. All those opposed, please unmute and say nay. Are there any abstentions? Okay, thank you. Draft recommendation 7 is adopted. We'll move on to our last draft recommendation.
Yes, the last one, you have 2 options. Option 1, the Conservation District Operations Program of DNREC's Division of Watershed Stewardship is released from review upon submission of the required reporting due to the committee. Or option 2, the Conservation District Operation Program of DNREC's Division of Watershed Stewardship is held over and shall report to the committee in January 2022. As the analyst who has been working with DNREC and the drainage program for the better part of a year and a half now, my recommendation would be option 1. As you've heard from the secretary, they've been continuing since they were placed under review in June to make these types of changes to better the operations and the services that they offer to the public. So my recommendation would be option 1.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any questions for Mark or the rest of the staff regarding draft recommendation 8? Okay, I'd entertain a motion if.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve option number 1 and recommendation number 8.
I'll second.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Thank you, Senator Pettyjohn. All those in favor of the motion to adopt option 1 for recommendation number 8, please signify with your silence. All those opposed, please unmute and say nay. Are there any abstentions? Okay, thank you. That last draft recommendation, option 1, is adopted. I appreciate everyone walking through each one with us. Don't worry, we will consider a separate format should we have many draft recommendations in the future. But I thought it was good to take each one in this time, especially because of the complexity of some of the topics that were involved. So thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Secretary Garvin, for being available I think we should have probably mentioned before we started this section of the meeting that the Conservation District is very valuable to many of us and our constituents, and can really be a lifeline for homeowners and property owners when it comes to these large infrastructure issues. So thank you for the work, and please pass along our thanks to the Conservation District operations.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of our stated agenda. Our next meeting is February 16th at 3 p.m. And we will be doing, again, this hybrid meeting. So we'll have a presentation by the Delaware Nursing Home Residents Quality Assurance Commission. And then we'll have draft recommendations to review from today's, that will come out of today's DIAA presentation. Are there any other questions or comments? All right, hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. As stated in the beginning, if all committee members could stay on for 30 seconds while we go off of the live stream, I would appreciate it. Thank you so much.